1874, the podcast with Dan Bardell and Gregg Evans.
Hello and welcome to the 1874 podcast with me, your host, Dan Bardell, joined by the Athletic's Gregg Evans to chew the fat over all things Aston Villa. Although this week we're only going to be chewing over one topic, aren't we, Greg? We're going to be talking about Douglas Luiz. This show is sponsored by NordVPN, and if you want to find out a little bit more about them, then there is a link in the description and a little bit of blurb about what Nord do, and we'll also play a little reel with what they offer later on in the show. Greg, before we get into Dougie, you can see I've gone, quite topical with my shirts in my background this morning, this afternoon, with the Douglas Luiz shirts. Those of you listening on audio won't be able to hear, but I will say, since I bought that Brazil Douglas Luiz shirt, form has not been as good as it once was. So I don't know whether I need to take some responsibility for that. But yeah, we're going to be talking about Douglas today, aren't we?
Yeah, I think it's a good time to talk about him. He's somebody that always comes into conversation every time a transfer window opens, it feels. And it's no different this summer. So yeah, Douglas is currently on international duty with Brazil, was a starting player in the late 3-2 win over Mexico a couple of days ago. And look, great for him that he's back in the international setup, because that's something that was really motivating him over the last sort of 18 months, because he'd fallen out of the picture, really. But yeah, we're going to get into it a bit more, aren't we? A bit of his Villa career and look back at it and discuss where we think he might be going in the future.
Yeah, I mean, he's 5 years into his time at Villa now. It's coming up to the 5-year anniversary of when he signed under Suso. He was the sporting director at the time. Player who probably at the start of his Villa career, it was a little bit of a mixed bag for the first 2-3, maybe even 2-3 years, you could say, under Dean Smith and under Steven Gerrard, but someone who has absolutely excelled in the main under Unai Emery. The fact now that in 2024 we're talking about him as one of Villa's crucial players, and we're talking about him being a starter for Brazil. One, it's testament to the signing originally, and shows that even if a signing doesn't always work out straight away, if you give people time and you get the right manager and get the infrastructure of a football club right, signings that didn't start great can be a success. But how much credit does he deserve? Because he's made himself a mainstay at Villa, and also now got a great chance of being a starter at the Copa America for Brazil.
Yeah, look, his career has flourished, and the last couple of seasons he's been excellent, particularly under Unai Emery. His goals and assists have improved, haven't they? He's become a bit of a set piece specialist over the last maybe 2 or 3 years. He didn't even take a free kick or a penalty when he first arrived to Villa. So that's just one part of his game that he's changed. I think if we go right back to the start, we look at the period where Villa were getting promoted into the Premier League from the Championship. They needed to restructure, didn't they? They needed to bring players in because a lot of the players were either aging or coming towards the end of their contracts, or had already been moved on. A few had become free agents, didn't they, in that summer? So Villa needed to sign players. Douglas Luiz wasn't really a player that was attracting too much interest across the Premier League. He had failed to get his work permit for various reasons, so he'd gone over to Girona. But Suso, the former sporting director, had tracked his progress, worked with his contacts closely in Spain, and met up with his father and his former agent, Carlos Leite, to discuss possibly coming to Villa, talking about the Villa project. And it was very much his idea to bring him into the club. And you've got to say, looking back now, that was a very shrewd move. The way Douglas Luiz has progressed is very impressive, and he's turned into a high caliber player for Villa and somebody of significant value. So yeah, first and foremost, fair play to Suso for recognising him. But yeah, what has happened since is largely down to the player himself, because he's worked extremely hard to become the good player that he is now.
Kind of evolved as a footballer positionally as well, because most of his football in the first few years at Villa came kind of playing as a lone defensive midfielder, which I think we could probably all agree isn't his best position and wasn't his best position there. When he came back after lockdown, he was absolutely brilliant. That last kind of stint of the season was actually a big reason why Villa stayed up, I would say, because he kind of not got his act together, because he was never really, really poor, although I have to admit there were certain facets of his game I wasn't having in that first half of the season in the Premier League, but he kind of adapted in lockdown. came back the next season and had a good maybe first half of the season. And then perhaps we didn't see the best of him for 12 or so months. Gerrard just, although I think he performed well under Gerrard just never seemed to have him down in the first 11. Gerrard was very reluctant to really play him. Then when Boubacar Kamara came, Gerrard kind of had Kamara, McGinn and Ramsey as his midfield three more often than not. That seemed to be the midfield three that Gerrard favoured. As soon as Unai Emery came in, a positional change because he kind of plays as two defensive midfielders, but someone who has been given a lot of license to get forward and score goals and make things happen. So although he's been excellent under Unai Emery, I think we've got to say that the change of position and the change of role at Villa has been a big thing in him becoming someone who was probably in the top 5 central midfielders in the league last season.
Yeah, and just experience, of getting to know the league, getting a little bit older, working with players for a significant amount of time, building up a relationship with someone like John McGinn in midfield and knowing what he does well and what he doesn't and what areas he can cover and what areas he can flourish in himself. I look back to that first season and Douglas was very much a player that wanted to get forward, score goals, contribute in attacking moments. But Villa needed him to be defensive minded at that point, and he wasn't really. There was a period where the coaching team felt that there wasn't a defensive bone in his body, and he's proven since that there is, and that he can act as a pretty fierce shield if needed at times. So yeah, his transition has been strange in some ways, because the fact that he became the first out of the current crop to reach 150 Premier League appearances for Villa is quite something, because I never expected him to get to that point. I just thought that there have been so many moments in his career where he probably, was so close to leaving. Villa first and foremost expected Manchester City to activate the buyback clause in his contract. And if you remember, they signed Morgan Sanson 5 or 6 months in advance to try and be one of the players that would replace Douglas when he inevitably moved back to Manchester City. That was very much in the thinking of those in power at Villa, that he was going to move back. And then further on, closer down in more recent times, Arsenal came in heavily for him on the deadline day of 2022, September 2022, I think it was. Yeah. And I remember speaking to Steven Gerrard after the defeat to Arsenal. Ironically, Villa had just played Arsenal, and Gerrard couldn't answer the question of whether Douglas Luiz was staying. He didn't know at that point. It was a case of he might go tomorrow, he might not. But fortunately for Villa, the owners decided that they didn't want to sell him, that they saw the potential in him. And, what has happened since is he's become, as you mentioned, Dan, one of the top 5 sort of holding midfielders in the Premier League.
I mean, you were talking, obviously we planned that we were going to do this show. Pretty much that's as far as the planning phase ever goes with this show. We just said what we were going to talk about, and then we again talk about Douglas Luiz and do a Douglas Luiz podcast this week. And you put quite a lot of emphasis onto me that, really that new contract was massive in what's ended up happening to Villa, wasn't it, moving forward? It may be at the time, felt like Villa maybe protecting themselves a little bit by giving him a new contract. I know I was very surprised when he signed that contract, because it was under Steven Gerrard and he never felt like he was a first choice player under Steven Gerrard. So I was surprised when he signed that contract, albeit he'd started the season well, scoring a few goals from corners and had looked good when he had played. But actually, what's transpired from him signing that new contract has actually been really, really important, Greg.
Yeah, and look, players, they want the security. They want to feel, loved and appreciated, but also rewarded financially. And Villa decided to do that to him, for him. Look, it was clear that Steven Gerrard didn't quite fancy him, and I think he did an interview with the Telegraph recently, Gerrard, and he sort of admitted, some of his own faults, but also said that some of the players at Villa were not performing to the level that they should have been. We could perhaps debate about who those individuals are, but let's be honest. If you look back at that period, almost every player was underperforming, and a lot of that is on the manager to get the team going. Yes, the players do need to take some responsibility, but Douglas Luiz was not performing very well at that time. He was being called upon in dribs and drabs, really, wasn't he? He wasn't a first name on the sheet. And I remember that horrible day at Fulham when Villa lost so badly on Steven Gerrard's last day, and he was, wrongly sent off on that day. But that was just typical of how his Villa career was going at that time. But behind the scenes, he didn't have the security of a long-term contract. He had lots of clubs sort of in his ear saying, if you can ride out this season, we'll give you a big pay rise at the end of the season because you'll be coming to us for nothing. So for Villa to actually get him signed on that contract was massive because, they were effectively going to be losing whatever value he is, 40, 50, 60 million pound player at the end of that season for nothing. But they managed to get him on this new deal. And then when Unai Emery came in, his form's improved since then.
It's mad, really, isn't it? Because I think at that time we didn't know Arsenal were going to become kind of, I'd say, elite team that they are now. Arsenal really, really progressed well over the last few years. He probably would have gone there. His reputation wasn't as high as it is now. I don't think he'd have been going to Arsenal I think he'd have probably been quite keen on the move to Arsenal at the time because he was on the bench for Villa. So, if you're swapping the bench for Villa for the bench for Arsenal at the time, it would have been a step up. There's no getting away from that because we weren't very good, quite frankly. If he was
and he wasn't playing too much, was he?
Yeah, so he would be swapping a bench for a bench. I don't think he'd have been in Arsenal's first 11, but he'd have been playing for the prestige of playing for Arsenal. If Douglas Luiz were to move now, coming up to 2 years on from that happening, he probably would, you'd say, be in Arsenal's best 11.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. You'd have to fit him in somewhere alongside Declan Rice, wouldn't you? Where does he fit in? If
Rice and Ødegaard, I would say, would be the midfield three in the main.
And that looks quite an attractive midfield, doesn't it? It's multifunctional, bit of everything in there. And Douglas, as he's proven, can go and score goals in the Premier League as well, which is what top performing teams want from their midfielders. But look, we're not saying that he's going to go to Arsenal. We're not trying to move him on. But there is always a discussion around Douglas Luiz whenever the transfer window opens, and it's no different this year because Villa are in a position where they need to move on a player. We know that, a player or two to bring in some funds back into the club to help them with the profit and sustainability rules. Is Douglas Luiz a good sale? I mean, personally, from somebody who watches Villa and have seen their development, I wouldn't like to see him leave. But if that if Villa are needing to sell somebody, it doesn't come across to me as a really bad one because you don't want to lose Emi Martinez, you don't want to lose Ollie Watkins. I think Boubacar Kamara and John McGinn are more important midfielder players than Luiz. So you're looking at who are the players that are attracting interest? Jacob Ramsey, Douglas Luiz, Matty Cash. That Luiz is probably in the middle of those, isn't he? You don't want to lose him, but you also know that perhaps they're going to have to move someone on at some point, and they've already bringing in Ross Barkley. So Unai Emery really likes him, thinks that he can fit in straight away, and thinks that he can improve the current midfield department. So. Clearly there's belief there that if one of the players does move on from Villa, that they've already got a ready-made replacement in Barkley.
See, I agree with some stuff you've said there, but I also disagree with some of the stuff you've said as well, because I think the rules are rubbish for a start. I think,
and that's why Villa are fighting them alongside other clubs.
Fair play to Villa for fighting because they've got to, because the fact that we've the best finish we've had since, or joint best finish, since 95, 96, we've qualified for the Champions League, which is a huge achievement. These rules are taking the gloss off that. For me, we shouldn't be in a position where we're saying, well, if we need to, in fact, not even to buy someone with someone, full stop, because of the rules for a fairly high amount of money. That's rubbish because we've been almost punished for finishing in the top four, and I don't think that's the way it should be at all. You can't.
But it would have been just to jump in, Dan. Sorry, it would have been that case, and it would have been far worse if Villa hadn't qualified for the Champions League, because the Champions League money that's coming in is actually helping Villa keep their squad together. If they hadn't qualified for the Champions League, and this was the message that I was constantly being given for the last 18 months, this summer would have been dreadful for them. They'd have really had to rip up the squad because, okay, maybe that's a bit dramatic. They wouldn't have had to rip up the squad. They'd have had to sell more players to bring more money in because of the Champions League money that they weren't getting.
I think you probably said, read between the lines of what you've just said. If we hadn't qualified for the Champions League, maybe we would be looking at an irreplaceable being sold, Martinez, Watkins. They're two that are irreplaceable for me.
Yeah, and for me, I've said consistently the three that I think Villa perform much better with, and you can maybe even add Torres into that now, make it four, and which makes an amazing spine. Is Martinez, Torres, McGinn, and Watkins. It's pretty nice to have a strong spine like that, and not every club has got it. So, but yeah. I remember even last year, before Villa decided to be creative with moving on some of their younger players, they were looking at the potential of a key sale at that point to try and balance the books. So it was going to be even tougher this year. The fact that they've qualified for the Champions League is just a big help. But yeah, from a supporter's point of view, it's pretty horrific, isn't it? You qualify for the Champions League and all of a sudden you think, well, we want to build on this. We've got this amazing squad that we've got now that has delivered the Champions League to us. Now we just want to increase bring a few more players in to improve it ever so slightly, but it's not going to be that easy.
No, we'll pick this conversation back up because it's an interesting conversation, Douglas Luiz's future. But before we do that, let's hear a little bit more from NordVPN. 1874 is proudly sponsored by NordVPN, so when and you can't watch it, we want to help you. NordVPN is a secure and private service which works on pretty much any device, including your laptop, mobile, television. So if you want to watch some live content, it allows you to appear like you're in another country. And whilst you're connected, no one else can find out what you're doing, including your internet service provider. Beyond this, the service also has threat protection baked in to protect you from intrusive website ads and malware, which is pretty handy for you. As part of NordVPN support performance for free, this also includes Nord's 30-day money-back guarantee. All you've got to do is go to 1874.io/NordVPN and sign up. All the details are also in the description. As always, we're very grateful to anyone that signs up. We know that money is tight, but if you think NordVPN will help you out, it will also help keep the channel running and help us too. Just going back, Greg, to something that you said before we broke, I think you name-checked Kamara as, and I think if Kamara was fit, maybe he'd be I'd rather see him go than Douglas Luiz. And I've seen a lot of people say that Kamara is more important. My problem with Kamara is fitness. He's missed a lot of games since he's joined Villa. I know he's younger than Luiz. He's probably a more unique type of player within the Villa squad because we don't really have another defensive midfielder. But I think because people are kind of getting in their head that Luiz may go, I almost feel people are forgetting how good he is. I know he didn't have the best second half of the season, the first half of the season and the back end of the season before. I thought he was absolutely sensational for 12 months, absolutely brilliant. And then when Kamara got injured, in fairness, there was a little bit of a drop off that coincided with me buying that Brazil shirt behind me as well. But do you think, because you're talking to me like Ross Barkley can come in, and you might not have been what you meant, but I'm just again reading between the lines of what you said. Ross Barkley coming in almost negates Luiz going. To me, I don't think that's true.
The powers that be at Villa feel that in Ross Barkley, they have a player now who can come in and be very, very competitive and not weaken the midfield department. That's without any sales.
Okay,
so
yeah, I agree with that.
That's without any sales. Now, if a player was to leave, a Douglas Luiz or a Kamara, I think there would be a hole there for Villa. And inevitably, there's going to be a hole somewhere that has to be created, to help balance the books. We just know that's the case. There's no hiding behind that. They're going to have to sell somebody. Matty Cash is attracting interest from AC Milan, but Villa are not interested in selling him at the money that they're offering. They'll have to go much higher for Villa to even consider selling. So with Luiz, it's a player who has interested lots of clubs for quite some time now. Arsenal has been relentless interest in Italy. Whether those clubs that are interested in him in Italy, AC Milan being one of them, Roma were previously, that's faded away now, and Juventus, whether they can afford him, is another matter. We'll have to see how the land lies with that. But I just think that that Villa have tried to act quickly by bringing in Barkley to and it's such a strange. I mean, Barkley is such a strange one, but this is a whole story in its own. I mean, I can't believe this hasn't been talked about, because is there a player ever? I might have said this in the previous podcast, but is there a player ever that's gone somewhere on loan, been below average, and then moved back to the club at a later date on a permanent signing under a different regime? I just can't think of any.
I've got
There
one.
must be
I've
one,
got
but
one.
I can't think of any.
Got one at Villa, but I wouldn't say he was below par. I thought Milner was okay when he came on loan. I think
But then he came the next season, didn't he?
Nah, missed the season.
Right, okay, fair enough.
So then
My
it's
bad.
probably a very similar time frame.
A
In fact,
unique.
Ross Barkley.
But he was good in the first loan season, wasn't he?
No one was great that season. We nearly got relegated. He was okay. He was just a young player on loan, and unfortunately for him, he'd had to replace a player, Alberto Solano, who was very productive for Villa the season before. So I just think he was okay. And then he came back to Villa, but never really hit amazing heights at Newcastle. It was at Villa where Milner really became the player that he went on to become. It was at Villa, wasn't it? Newcastle, he was in and out, was never a first-team regular. So this probably the timeline of those two, that is probably similar, although I take your point of what you're saying, because Barkley was pretty underwhelming in that spell.
Yeah, it's just unusual. I just, couldn't think of any off the top of my head. So thanks for filling in a gap there.
Thanks for ruining what you said.
No, I appreciate it. I'm sure there are plenty of others. And if there anyone's listening and they've got any other good examples that they want to share, please let me know, because I might write an article on this at some point, because I do think it is quite rare.
Okay, Yokoshlu at West Brom, sorry.
But he was very good though. He was very good in the first season.
Okay.
Yeah, he was very good in the first season and went away. But so I think that's happened. Players have been good and perhaps moved back, but players who have been bad and then moved back, it just doesn't. I couldn't think of any. So
it's an intriguing move, the Ross Barkley one. But you see, I look at that and think, if Villa go into next season with the 4 central midfield options of Barkley, Luiz, Kamar, and Tielemans, and then they've also got John McGinn who can play there if needs. But I look at that and think, that's brilliant. That's stronger than last season, because Barkley's essentially replacing Dendoncker or Obenham, and I think Barkley fits what Unai Emery wants to do more. But suddenly, I think if you take Luiz out of that midfield, I'm looking at it and thinking, okay, not sure about this. And I've been saying all along I wouldn't want to lose Ramsey. Actually, if I think about it from a squad building point of view, if he were to go, I feel like the replacement is kind of there already in Morgan Rogers. I don't want Ramsey to go, because I think he's brilliant, and I think if Villa were to have to sell him now, it would be at a far lower value than they would have got 12 months ago. And there's obviously question marks over his fitness now. So Villa wouldn't be getting. I think they probably get less for Ramsey than they get for Douglas Luiz in this situation. In terms of the squad, I still think Luiz is a big hole to fill. You take away his set pieces, take away his assists and his goals as well. That would need replacing, and how much does that cost?
Yeah, and look, let's not forget Luiz is a record breaker at Villa. He broke a goal scoring record set by Dwight York for the most
ridiculous in itself. Consecutive goals. Said that would happen.
Yeah. So let's not underestimate how important Douglas Luiz has been in the last few seasons. The last season in particular, he scored 9 goals. I think only Rodri was behind. Rodri was next to him in terms of defensive midfielders scoring those amount of goals. I think he got 8 goals, Rodri. So look, Luiz was fantastic last year. Played a real important role. But he's been at the club for 5 years. He was signed for 15 million and can be moved on for a significant amount more. It might just be the time to do business, and it might be looked back on in the future as being a good move. There are 2 sides to the argument, of course. As I said, first and foremost, I wouldn't like to see him go, because I rate him and I think he's good in a Villa shirt and he's important for the team. But look, Kamara's likely to be out until September or October, so Villa are going to need a few options in those early months of the season. And I've always wondered whether Kamara would be a player that Villa would look to move on in at some point. Because
isn't he? He was a free.
Yeah, he was a free signing, and the thing that's going against him a little bit now, and this just shows how difficult transfers are. Villa worked so hard on the data around Kamara to bring him into the club, and worked on certain individual metrics that helped them decide why he would be a perfect fit for them. And performance-wise, he has been there, but his durability before moving to Villa was, incredible. That was one of the main reasons why he was signed, because he very rarely missed games, yet he's had 3, long periods out at Villa, and that's really frustrating and disappointing for him himself. He's gone through lots of hard work privately to try and get back quicker than expected. He installed equipment into his own home during the last injury to try and speed up the process of recovery, and actually came back to fitness a lot quicker. So he desperately wants this. It's very unfortunate, but it just shows that how much planning goes into a signing, and then things can change so quickly. So just going back to Luiz, Villa always expected him to become this player that he is, potentially a permanent Brazilian international, somebody who played regularly. They hoped that he would become that when they signed him. And sometimes you just need a bit of time, doesn't it? To have now had over 160 appearances in the Premier League, it's so important, because he just gets the league now. He knows it. He knows how it works. He knows what the grounds are like where he goes to. He's never going to be overawed by an opponent, because he's come up against most of them before, and he fits very well into Emery's style.
He's almost Emery's lieutenant, is he? Whenever there's a break in play, who is it that Emery goes and talks to?
Yeah.
He talks to Douglas Luiz. We saw it in the Olympiacos game. He was going mad. Not just he was going mad to Luiz, but I'm sure it wasn't just about Luiz. He was probably speaking about the whole team at that point. I've got to be honest. I'm generally quite worried about football at the moment in general. I'm worried about England coming up. But starting the season with no Kamar and no Luiz in that central midfield, going into a Champions League campaign, that doesn't sit right with me. That doesn't sit well with me at all, because you're taking out your best 11 at the moment, your 2 starting central midfielders. Are those 2? Villa starting a campaign that's a big, huge one for the club without those 2 lining up there. That concerns me.
So what I'd say on that, I'd say the way that Kamara's going to be back at some point. So
I'm just saying in August when we kick a ball for the first time, they're not there.
It's not too much of a worry, because there are plenty of clubs that sign players in the summer, knowing full well that the players aren't going to be fully up to speed until maybe October and November. That happens across European football in general. Players are signed, and the team and the coach that signed them know that they're going to take some time to get into it. So I don't think the first few weeks or months of a season are a massive concern, because they know that at some point a tried and trusted player in Kamar is going to be back and available. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. There's also there is interest in other midfielders that Villa have already held talks with. Conor Gallagher at Chelsea, and he could be a player that comes in. Is he as good on the ball as Douglas Luiz? No way, nowhere near. Technically he's way below Douglas Luiz's level, but what he'll bring is, and if he does come to Villa, and what we might see in an England shirt this summer, is that his pressing ability and his work off the ball he's a lot better than other midfielders. So he brings something much different to the table, and that appeals to Emery. That off the ball work. He will provide more, but I just think on the ball that Villa are going to lack a little bit. Lose a bit of quality in Gallagher if he's replacing Luiz, but all that is just speculation at this point.
And I'm sure I think Emery he kind of changed the way Villa played the season, just gone from back at the second half of the season he was there before, and I think for a manager who talks a lot about control, Luiz is a big part of that for me. You take him out, I kind of feel like Emery's buzzword is lessened, because undoubtedly, if we replace Luiz with Gallagher, the control element would go. And the things you've just spoke about Gallagher being good at isn't really what we do. We run the least from the stats that were on that Monday Night Football. We don't run very much. It's very it's tactical, but things Gallagher's good at don't fit with what we're good at the moment, and maybe that will change because tactics will change, and I'm sure the team will evolve. But do you understand what I'm saying? Yeah,
no, definitely. I think Emery's perhaps learned his lesson from the failing, shall we say, at Arsenal, and that you can't play the same way. You do have to adapt and move on, and I think he's shown that in the future, in the subsequent jobs that he's had. So there will be new styles and patterns of play that Villa will be working
Yeah,
on
cool.
this year to make sure that they don't become predictable. And look, at the back end of last season, it was quite worrying for Villa, wasn't it? The way they ended the season, it was a pretty poor run of results. It felt like teams were starting to figure Villa out a little bit. It didn't help with all the injuries, of course, and the fact that Villa had a very long campaign. So inevitably there was going to be some drop off at some point, but there will be changes. And I think, Villa didn't run as much as other teams previously, and that was part of the plan in some ways. But that might have to change next year. And if you've got one or two players that can, do the running of two or three players, that might be helpful.
I've got to say, Gallagher and McGinn feels like a very pressing
Yeah,
midfield with
it
both
sounds quite
them
fun.
in. Yeah, both them
I
in.
like Gallagher. I
I do
like
too.
Gallagher. I think he's good. I think he's good going. I think he's good getting into attacking areas and scoring the odd goal. I think he presses very well. He maybe gives away a few too many fouls, which doesn't help the control of the game.
In fairness, Douglas Luiz is pretty good at doing that as well.
Yeah, I just think, but he's a very combative and energetic player, and somebody who is improving.
Yeah, just to kind of finish then, kind of the elephant in the room that we've not really spoken about in this show, which is bizarre. We've come this far without mentioning it. Is that we're talking about Luiz signing that new deal? It doesn't feel that long ago, really.
Yeah.
But he's got 2 years left on his contract now. So when the player gets to 2 years left on the contract, you start to wonder: is he going to sign a new one? Do they cash in this summer? Which is the stuff we've been talking about.
Yeah,
Kind of been mooted that there has been an offer of a contract on the table for Douglas Luiz for a while, and he's not signed it. I said previously that Villa might have a problem this summer in that they might want to move people on, and I referenced Luca Dean was one Diego Carlos, but Luca Dean once has already kind of been tried to move on and has ended up staying and played a hell of a lot of games. Players who've helped Villa qualify for the Champions League might not necessarily want to go, and Douglas Luiz could fall into that category where he might just be thinking, well, I'll give it another year, or maybe another year or two. I could potentially move down to being a free transfer signing, and my options would be, you imagine on a free, a lot of teams would be in for him. One, what's your thoughts on the contract situation? Is it on the table? Two, like I say, players that aren't necessarily going to want to go, and Douglas Luiz might think, if they try and sell me, I don't want to go. I want to play Champions League for Villa. I've worked really hard for us to get here.
My understanding is that, look, we've got to hear from Douglas Luiz, but he was very keen on the Arsenal move before, and that didn't happen. So there was a bit of frustration there.
But then he signed a contract.
But then Villa promised, when they held the talks with him, the owners said to him, look, we are rejecting these offers from Arsenal because we don't want to sell you. We believe that you can fulfill your potential at Villa. We're going to reward you financially, improve your contract and give you a longer deal if you stay. And in the end, he was happy with that. And look, the conversations are a little bit different now because Villa have qualified for the Champions League. And previously, when he was signing the contract, and this is, this happens with lots of players, clubs will often say to them, stick around with us, sign the deal, we'll give you an improved contract, we'll give you more money. We would love to see you flourish with us. We want you to help us get to a certain position, and we'll help you get to a certain position. If we don't, we'll happily listen to offers, and you can move on in the future. So those conversations would have happened around the time that he signed the new deal. But Villa are in a different environment now. They're a Champions League club and they want to keep their best players, but they know that they need to sell some of them on. And look, I don't know the exact definitive thoughts of Emery, but there are players that he's looking at, and there are players in that Villa squad that he knows he could improve on.
I also wonder, it's one that we can speculate, but we don't know the answer to. I wonder what the number is of an offer Villa would accept. I wonder what fee we'd be looking at for someone for 2 years left on his contract who is a high level Premier League player. I just wonder what's the magic number that Villa would say, okay.
Yeah, I mean, look, I haven't got an answer. If I had the answer, I'd say to you, but we'd just be speculating.
Yeah. Okay, right. That does us. I think interesting show today, Greg. I don't think we've done many where we've just focused on a single player for a whole episode. But yeah, nice refreshing change to do that today. Albeit some stuff we don't really want to be talking about, but we are where we are, and so we'll talk about what's going on, and that's what we've done on the show. Thanks to Adam for producing, and thanks to NordVPN for sponsoring us. Thanks to Greg for joining me today for this chat as well. Wherever you're taking in this podcast, whether it be via audio or whether it be via video, if you could do all the things that help the channel, like subscribe, leave a review, comments, likes, everything helps wherever you're taking in the pod. So please, if you're enjoying the content, do all that good stuff for us. I've noticed actually there was a couple of reviews on Apple Podcasts that were nice reviews. So yeah, if you're listening to us via that medium, if you could leave us a nice review and give us 5 stars on there if you're enjoying it, that would be absolutely brilliant. Do another video in the week at some point, might jump on myself and just do something, find a topic and talk around it for 10-15 minutes. Want to try and get 2-3 videos out a week if we can through the summer. I'm sure there'll be plenty to discuss, and I'm sure Greg discussed Douglas Luiz this summer as well. Have a good week up until the next time we produce a video and a podcast. And yeah, excellent. Euros coming. Everyone's looking forward to it as much as me, although like I said to Greg, I'm very, very worried. But yeah, this is the most rambly outro there's ever been. Up the Villa.